The forest on the edge of the human colony world. Arden was quiet that evening. The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the tall trees in gold and red. A cool wind moved through the leaves, carrying the scent of earth and pine. Mark walked slowly along the patrol path, his boots crunching on dry twigs. He had been assigned to this area for the week, scanning for any signs of animal migration or unknown activity. Most of the time, patrols were uneventful. Sometimes he would see a wild creature dash through the underbrush or hear the distant call of a night bird. But that evening, he felt something different. The air seemed charged, almost expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Mark paused near a ridge and scanned the tree line with his field scope. At first, he saw nothing but shadows between the trunks. Then a faint glint caught his eye, a shimmer of silver moving between the branches. He focused the scope and saw a figure stepping carefully over roots and stones. The figure was tall, taller than any human woman, with long limbs and a graceful, deliberate movement. She wore a smooth, silver armor that reflected the fading light in soft flashes. A helmet covered her head completely, the faceplate dark and unreadable. Mark crouched low, watching in silence. He had heard stories of strangers in the forest, but this was the first time he had seen one. The figure stopped, as if sensing his eyes on her. Slowly, she turned her head toward his hiding place. For a moment, neither of them moved. The forest around them was still. Then she began to walk toward him. Mark rose from his crouch but kept his hand near his sidearm. He had no idea if she was friend or foe. When she was close enough, she lifted her hands to her helmet and pressed two small clasps on either side. The helmet hissed softly and came away. Her face was unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin was pale with a faint silver glow, smooth as polished stone. Her eyes were a deep violet, almost too bright in the dim forest. Her hair fell in a straight, shimmering wave down to her shoulders, catching the last light of the setting sun. She looked young, but her gaze held the weight of someone who had seen many years. She spoke, her voice low and careful, her accent strange. "Human," she said. "I need safe passage." Mark blinked. Safe passage? From what? She hesitated before answering. From those who follow. They mean harm. To me, to you, to many. There was something in her tone that made Mark believe her instantly, though he did not know why. "What's your name?" he asked. "I am Liren, of the Veyari Alliance," she said slowly, as if measuring each word. "I have come to speak with your leaders. The danger grows close." Mark took a step toward her. "I can guide you to the colony, but it's a long walk, and we have to move before nightfall." Her eyes shifted downward for a moment, and Mark noticed her hands. They were covered in thin silver gloves, but they trembled slightly. Not from cold. The air was warm enough, but from something deeper, fear, or maybe hesitation. Without another word, Liren nodded. They began walking along the narrow trail that cut through the forest. Mark led the way, keeping his pace steady so she could follow. Her movements were graceful, yet there was a tension in her steps, as if every sound from the forest put her on alert. They spoke little at first. Mark asked where she had come from, and she replied in short, careful sentences. She told him she had traveled through uncharted space alone, using hidden routes. Her mission was urgent, but she avoided saying exactly what it was. As they moved, Mark began to notice small things. The way she turned her head quickly when a branch snapped in, the distance. The way her hand rested lightly on a device at her belt, ready at a moment's notice. And the way she kept a careful space between them, never letting her arm or shoulder brush against his. When the trail narrowed between two high ridges, Mark stopped to check his map scanner. Liren stood behind him, her gaze fixed on the darkening forest. Her breathing was quiet, but quick. "You're trembling," Mark said softly without turning. Her voice came slowly. It is. Not the cold. My people, we do not often stand so near to humans. Mark frowned. Why not? Lyraeans. Violet eyes met his for a brief moment, and in that look, he saw something he could not name. Not fear alone, but something heavier. Because there are bonds that once formed cannot be undone, she said, then looked away. He wanted to ask more, but she had already stepped forward, signaling for them to keep moving. The forest was growing darker by the minute, and the soft hum of night insects was beginning to fill the air. They reached a shallow stream, its surface glowing faintly under the light of Arden's twin moons. Mark crossed first, balancing on the flat stones that jutted from the water. When he turned, he saw Lyraen standing on the bank, her eyes fixed on him. "Come on," he said. She stepped onto the first stone, then another, moving with careful precision. Halfway across, she paused. Her gaze drifted to the water, and Mark saw her hands tighten slightly. When she reached the far side, she hesitated before stepping onto the ground beside him. For the briefest moment, she lifted her gloved hand toward his, almost as if to take it, but stopped. Her fingers curled slightly, and her arm lowered again. Mark said nothing, but he noticed the way her shoulders rose and fell as she breathed. The faint tremble still in her hands. They continued in silence until they reached the mouth of a small cave where they could rest for the night. Inside, Mark lit a small lantern, its warm glow filling the stone walls with soft light. Lyraen sat. Opposite him, her armor plates catching the light in shifting patterns. He offered her a ration pack, and she accepted with a nod. As they ate in silence, Mark studied her face. There was strength there, but also something fragile, a weight she carried that he could not yet see. Finally, she spoke again, her voice even softer than before. "Human, if you guide me to your leaders, you may hear truths that will change your world, but there is a price to knowing such things." Mark leaned forward slightly. "And that price?" Her violet eyes locked on his once more. "The closer you walk beside me, the more dangerous it becomes. For you. For me." The wind outside the cave whistled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an unfamiliar howl rose into the night. Mark's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. Lyraen watched him carefully, and for the first time, Mark saw something in her expression. Not just fear, but a deep uncertainty. And as the shadows in the cave danced around them, he wondered if the danger she spoke of was already here, standing between them. The cave was quiet, except for the soft hum of the lantern and the faint rustle of leaves outside. Mark sat with his back to the wall, keeping his rifle within easy reach. Lyraen sat on the other side, her legs folded neatly beneath her, eyes fixed on the firelight as if lost in thought. For a while, neither spoke. Mark had learned that sometimes silence revealed more than questions. But tonight, the silence carried weight, like a rope drawn tight between them. Finally, he broke it. "If there's danger coming for us, I need to know what we're dealing with?" Lyraen's gaze shifted toward him, but she didn't speak right away. She seemed to choose her words carefully, as if each one carried more meaning than it showed. "The Kraden," she said at last, "are hunters. They work for whoever pays most, but some, they hunt for their own reasons. They follow me now, because I carry something they do not want humans to hear." Mark leaned forward slightly. "Then all the more reason to tell me. If I know I can protect you." Her eyes held his for a moment, the violet light in them steady and unreadable. "Protection is not so simple. The danger is not only from them. It can come from me, too." He frowned. "From you?" Lyraen lowered her eyes to the floor, her hands resting loosely on her knees. "My people, we live by certain laws. One of them forbids close contact with outsiders. If such contact happens, there is a risk, a bond that cannot be undone. And when it forms, both lives change forever. Many see it as dangerous. Mark's brow furrowed. What kind of bond? Not like your words for friendship. Not like love. It is connection, deeper than thought. We feel each other's pain. We share each other's strength. We cannot hide from each other. Some call it a gift. Others call it a curse. She lifted her head slightly. That is why I keep my distance. If I touch you, and the bond forms, it will never end, no matter what happens. Mark didn't know what to say to that. He had met many alien species during his time on Arden, but none had spoken of something like this. He wondered if her trembling hands the day before had been because she feared this bond, or because somewhere deep down she felt it already trying to happen. The sound of breaking branches outside broke the moment. Liren's head snapped toward the entrance. Her movements became sharp and alert. Mark grabbed his rifle and moved toward the opening. "Stay here," he said. She stood immediately. "No, if it is them, they will not come for you. They come for me." They stepped outside into the moonlit forest. The night was cool and still, but somewhere beyond the trees there was movement. A soft scrape of metal, a shifting shadow. Mark scanned the darkness through his scope. Nothing. Then, without warning, a faint green light flashed between the trunks. A signal, or maybe the reflection of an enemy visor. Liren stepped closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They are here." "How many?" "I do not know, but they move in threes." The faint sound of footsteps began to circle the clearing. Mark felt his pulse quicken. He knew these hunters wouldn't attack until they had the advantage. "Back to the cave," he said. But as they turned, the first shadow dropped from a tree, landing silently just a few meters away. The figure was tall, wrapped in dark armor, its helmet shaped like a predator's skull. In one hand, it held a long, curved blade. The Kraden moved forward, silent as a shadow. Then another appeared from the other side, and a third blocked the path to the cave. "They're surrounding us," Mark said under his breath. Liren stepped in front of him, her silver armor catching the moonlight. She spoke in her own language, quick, sharp syllables that carried authority. "The Kraden." Leader tilted its head but did not respond. Instead, it advanced another step. "They will not stop," Liren said quietly to Mark. "We must move." Mark looked at the small gap between two hunters. "Through there?" "Yes." "Now." They moved as one, sprinting toward the gap. A flash of green light burst beside them, a Kraden weapon firing. Mark ducked low, returning fire with short bursts, forcing the hunters to step back. Liren moved with speed that was almost inhuman, slipping between the shadows and drawing a small silver disc from her belt. She threw it to the ground, and it exploded in a burst of white light. The Kraden stumbled, momentarily blinded. Mark and Liren ran into the forest, weaving between trees, their breaths quick and heavy. Branches whipped past them, and the ground dipped sharply. They slid down a slope into a narrow ravine, the air cooler and damp with the smell of moss. The sounds of pursuit followed close behind. "Keep moving," Liren urged. Mark's boot caught on a root and he stumbled. He caught himself on one knee but felt a sharp sting in his arm. Shrapnel from a Kraden shot. His grip on the rifle loosened. Liren turned instantly, kneeling beside him. Her gloved hand reached out toward his bare skin, then stopped just short. Her fingers trembled in the air, inches away. "Let me help you," she said, voice strained. "You'll risk the bond," Mark said through clenched teeth. "I will risk it," she answered. But instead of touching him directly, she slipped a section of her armor under his arm, using it to pull him to his feet without skin contact. "We go!" she said firmly. They pressed deeper into the ravine until the sound of the hunters began to fade. Eventually, they found a small overhang of rock and took shelter beneath it. Mark leaned against the wall, breathing hard, the ache in his arms spreading slowly. Lyraen knelt across from him, eyes scanning the dark ravine entrance. Her voice was calm but edged with urgency. "They will follow until we are beyond their range. We must reach the old ruins. The stones there will hide our trail." Mark studied her face in the faint moonlight. Her earlier words about the bond returned to him, and he wondered if her hesitation in touching him was more than law. Maybe it was also fear of what it would mean for her own life. Yet in the heat of the chase, she had risked herself for him without a second thought. As they prepared to move again, Mark realized that whatever lay ahead in those ruins, it would bring them closer together, and maybe closer to the very danger she feared. The night pressed heavy over the ravine, its shadows thick and full of whispers. Mark followed close behind Lyraen, his boots crunching on wet stones. The narrow path twisted like a snake, the steep walls rising on both sides. Above them, the pale moons were hidden by branches, letting only faint silver light spill into the gap. The ache in Mark's arm had grown sharper, but he pushed it aside. He focused on Lyraen's movements, smooth, fast, and deliberate. She never stumbled, never paused. Yet she checked behind them often, her violet eyes catching faint light whenever she turned. "They will not stop," she said without slowing. "The Kraden will follow until we vanish, or until one of us falls." Mark's jaw tightened. "Then we need to make sure we disappear before morning." Lyraen nodded once. "The ruins are ahead. If we reach them, the stones will hide our trace. Kraden trackers cannot read the paths inside." The sound of pursuit came again, soft but clear, a low rhythm of armored feet on stone. The hunters were closing in. Lyraen glanced over her shoulder. "They are closer than I thought. We must move faster." Mark adjusted his grip on the rifle and picked up his pace. The ravine narrowed further until they had to move in single file. The walls closed in, wet and cold to the touch. Water dripped from cracks, splashing onto their boots. The sound of the Kraden echoed in the confined space, each step bouncing between the walls. Mark's muscles tensed. This narrow path meant they could be trapped easily. A faint glow appeared ahead, not moonlight but something pale and steady. As they drew closer, Mark saw that the ravine ended in an open space, and beyond it stood the first of the ancient stones. The ruins rose from the earth like broken teeth, tall slabs of weathered stone covered in markings. Some glowed faintly as if holding light from another time. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with something that made the skin prickle. Lyraen slowed, her eyes scanning the symbols. She touched one of the stones lightly with her gloved fingers. "These are older than your colony," she said quietly. "Older than your people's first ships." Mark looked around, his rifle ready. "You've been here before?" She shook her head. "No, but my people know of them. We keep their location secret. Not all truths are safe to share." The sound of the Kraden entering the open space made them both turn. 3 dark shapes emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn. The leader's armor reflected the faint glow of the stones, making its predator-like helmet gleam. "They've found us," Mark muttered. Lyraen stepped slightly in front of him. "The ruins are dangerous for those who do not respect them. We can use that." Before Mark could ask how, she moved quickly toward a cluster of stones arranged in a half-circle. She pressed her palm to one of them, and a faint vibration passed through the ground. The glowing markings shifted, flowing like liquid light. The Kraden hesitated, clearly wary, but their leader barked a sharp command, and they advanced. "Stay close," Lyraen told Mark. He followed her through the half-circle. As soon as they stepped inside, the air grew warmer, and the sounds from outside seemed distant, muffled as if wrapped in thick cloth. The Kraden reached the edge of the circle but stopped, their weapons raised. The leader paced along the boundary, its movements frustrated. Mark frowned. "Why aren't they coming in?" "This place has rules," Liren said, her voice steady. "Those who step inside without the right guide do not return. The Kraden know this." Mark scanned the stone walls, the shifting symbols casting a soft glow over Liren's face. "How long will this keep them out?" "Not forever," she admitted. "We must move deeper." They followed a narrow path between tall stones, each one etched with flowing lines and strange patterns. Mark's boots echoed softly on the smooth ground. The air smelled faintly of rain and something metallic. As they walked, Mark noticed more symbols carved into the walls, some of them in shapes that looked oddly familiar. He slowed, running his fingers over one. They look like old human writing." Liren stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the same symbol. "Yes, that is why your people must not know of this place too soon. It would raise questions neither of our worlds are ready to answer." Mark looked at her. "You mean humans and your people have met before?" "Long ago," she said quietly, "before either of our histories began. The bond between us is older than memory. It is part of why my people fear contact with yours." He thought of her trembling hand at the stream and her refusal to touch him. "Because of the bond you told me about." Her eyes met his, and she nodded slowly. "Yes, and here, in places like this, the bond is stronger." Before he could reply, a deep, resonant sound rolled through the air, like a distant horn. Liren's posture stiffened. "They are trying to break the boundary," she said. "We must hurry." They moved quickly, weaving through the ruins. The ground sloped downward, and soon they were walking through an arched tunnel of stone. Faint light shone from cracks in the walls, enough to guide their steps. Mark could hear the pounding of his own heartbeat and the occasional faint echo of the Kraden outside. At last, they reached a wide chamber where the ceiling opened to the night sky. The stars above seemed brighter here, framed by the ancient stone. In the center of the chamber stood a tall pillar with markings that pulsed faintly. Liren approached it with careful steps. "This is the heart of the ruins. If we pass beyond this point, the Kraden will lose our trail entirely." Mark followed her, but his eyes kept scanning the shadows. "What's the catch?" "There is no path beyond without cost," she said. "The stones demand a truth, freely given." Mark raised an eyebrow. "A truth?" "Yes. Something. You would not speak except by choice. The ruins hear it. They decide if you may pass." He glanced at her. "And if they don't let us through? Then we stay here until the Kraden find a way in." The thought of being trapped here made Mark uneasy. Still, he could see no other way forward. "Fine. I'll go first." He stepped up to the pillar. The markings brightened slightly, casting a pale light over his face. For a moment, he felt as if something unseen was watching him. "My truth," he said slowly, "is that I don't trust easily. But right now, I trust you." The pillar's light pulsed once, then faded to its original glow. Liren stepped forward, her hands curling slightly as if she hesitated. "My truth," she said softly, "is that I fear the bond, not because of what it would do to me, but because of what it would do to you." The pillar's light flared bright, and a low sound like a sigh filled the chamber. A path opened in the far wall, a narrow doorway of shifting light. They exchanged a glance. Mark felt the weight of her words, and for a moment the air between them seemed warmer. Then the distant sound of the Kraden breaking through shattered the moment, and they stepped into the light together. The air in the small chamber felt thick, almost alive with a strange energy. Mark stood beside Liraine, his heart beating faster than usual. The silence around them was heavy, filled with the weight of the unknown. The soft glow from the walls pulsed gently, casting shifting shadows over their faces. Liraine's hand twitched at her side again. For a moment, it seemed as if she might reach out to Mark. Instead, she clenched her fingers tightly and looked away. "We cannot stay here," Mark said softly. "The Kraden will find us soon." She nodded but said nothing. Her violet eyes held a mix of fear and determination that made Mark want to reach out, to ease whatever burden she carried. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the floor beneath their feet. Cracks appeared in the stone walls and dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere beyond the chamber, heavy footsteps echoed closer and closer. "They are coming," Lyrian whispered. "We must choose, now." Mark looked at her, his mind racing. "Choose what?" "The bond," she said quietly. "If we face them together, the bond between us may form. It will give us strength, more than either of us has alone. But once it happens, there is no going back." Mark swallowed hard. He had heard the stories, the warnings. The bond was powerful, but dangerous. It connected two beings deeply, sharing pain, thoughts, memories, and feelings. It was a link that changed lives forever. "Do you want the bond to happen?" Mark asked. Lyrian looked down at her trembling hands. "I have fought it all my life. It is forbidden among my people to bond with outsiders. It can bring ruin. But it might save us," Mark said firmly. "If it helps us fight, I want it." She met his gaze and nodded slowly. "Then we must begin." Lyrian stepped closer. The air between them seemed to pulse. Mark's breath caught as she raised her hand toward his. The silver glove shimmered faintly in the glowing light. Her fingers reached out slowly, trembling as if the act held 1,000 risks. Mark held his own hand steady and whispered, "I want to touch your hand." At last her fingers brushed his skin. The moment their hands met, an electric shock ran through both of them. It was a sudden rush of warmth, light, and emotion that filled Mark's whole body. He felt Liraine's heartbeat in his chest. He heard her thoughts as clearly as his own. He saw flashes of her memories, vivid images of alien worlds, battles, moments of joy and sorrow. Her fear, her hope, her loneliness, all poured into him. At the same time, she felt his courage, his steady will, and the deep care he held for her. The bond was forming faster than either expected. Liraine's breath hitched, and her trembling hand gripped Mark's tightly. The power of the connection was overwhelming, but it also felt right, as if they had been made to find each other. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the moment. The stone chamber shook violently. Outside, the sound of Kraden war cries echoed closer. "We have no time," Mark said. "Use the bond. Let's fight." Lyrian nodded. Together, their senses sharpened. They could anticipate each other's moves, their thoughts linking in perfect harmony. The chamber door shattered as the Kraden burst inside, weapons raised. Mark raised his rifle, but Liraine moved with lightning speed, pulling him behind a broken pillar. Through the bond, Mark felt her strength. She moved with grace and power, striking with energy blades that hummed through the air. Mark fired with precision, guided by the connection that let him predict where she would be. The Kraden faltered, confused by their sudden unity. Two became one in battle, mind and body moving as one. But then the Kraden commander appeared, larger and more heavily armored than the rest. It roared and charged at them with brutal force. Liraine stepped forward to meet the charge, but the commander struck hard. She took the blow, staggering backward, pain flashing through the bond to Mark's very soul. Mark's heart pounded. "Liraine!" he shouted, reaching for her. She fell to one knee, breath coming in sharp gasps. Mark grabbed her arm to steady her. His fingers brushed her bare skin beneath the glove. The bond flared bright, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Liraine looked at him, eyes filled with pain, but also trust. "Don't let go," she whispered. Mark tightened his grip. "Never." Summoning strength from their shared bond, Liraine rose again. Her power surged as they fought side by side. The Kraden. Commander snarled and retreated, seeing they could not win. When silence returned, Mark lowered his rifle. Lirian leaned against him, breathing heavily but alive. The bond between them had changed everything. Mark looked at her trembling hand in his, no longer afraid to touch. "I am glad I reached for your hand," he said softly. She smiled faintly, warmth returning to her eyes. "And I am glad you did." Outside the ruins, the stars shone quietly, watching the beginning of a new story. One written not by war alone, but by the bond of two very different souls. The doorway of light closed behind them like a curtain falling. One moment, Mark could still hear the echoes of the Kraden breaking into the ruins. The next, there was silence, deep and heavy, like the world outside no longer existed. The passage ahead was narrow, carved from smooth black stone that shimmered faintly as if it held its own light. The air was warmer here, carrying the faint scent of rain on metal. Liraine walked ahead, her movements slow and careful. She didn't look back, but Mark could tell she was listening to every step he took. Her posture was tense, like she was waiting for something to happen. "How far does this go?" Mark asked quietly. "Far enough that they will not follow," she replied. "But we must reach the center. There, the stones will hide us completely." Mark kept his voice low. "You've been acting like these ruins are dangerous. If they're safe from the Kraden, what's the real risk?" Liraine slowed. Her hand brushed one of the glowing walls. "Because here, the stones see everything. They feel what we feel. And in this place, the bond between a Veyari and a human is stronger than anywhere else." Mark stepped closer. "You keep talking about this bond, but you've never explained all of it. What happens if it forms?" She stopped walking. For a moment, she stood in silence, her back to him. Then she turned slowly, the faint light from the walls reflecting in her violet eyes. "When a Veyari bonds with a human, it is not just emotion," she said. "It is a joining of thought, memory, and will. We can feel each other's strength and each other's pain. If one is injured, the other feels it. If one dies, the other may not survive." Mark's brow furrowed. "So it's dangerous, because it's permanent." "Yes," she said softly. "We do not choose lightly. The bond cannot be undone. Our laws forbid it with outsiders because it can change the course of lives and worlds." He thought of the way her hand had trembled when she almost touched him at the stream, the way she had pulled back as if afraid of herself. "And you think this could happen between us?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I think it is already close." Words lingered in the still air. Mark didn't know what to say. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. Not just a threat to his life, but something that could change who he was forever. Before he could answer, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling was high, lost in shadow, but the walls glowed with patterns of shifting light. In the center stood a wide pool of still water, its surface like a mirror. Liraine stepped to the edge and knelt. She dipped her gloved hand into the water, and the surface rippled, sending waves of light across the walls. "This place is called the Chamber of Echoes," she said. "It remembers every bond that has ever formed here. My people say the water shows the truth of what will be, if you dare to look." Mark joined her at the edge. The water reflected his face at first, then slowly shifted. A new image took form. Him and Liraine, standing side by side on some alien world, surrounded by battle. Their hands were joined. He drew in a breath. What is this supposed to mean? It means the stones already see the path, she said. But paths can change if the choice changes. Mark shook his head slightly. I don't even know if I want this bond, but you're saying the choice might not even be mine to make? Her voice was calm, but there was something in it, a faint trace of fear. The stones choose. Sometimes they wait for the touch. Sometimes they do not. Before Mark could reply, a low rumble passed through the floor. The water in the pool shivered. Liren's head snapped up. They are forcing their way in, she said quickly. The Kraden have found a path. Mark scanned the chamber. Is there another exit? Yes, but it lies beyond the Hall of Mirrors, and that place... She hesitated. That place tests what is between us. They left the pool and entered a long corridor lined with tall panels of polished black stone. The panels reflected not just their bodies, but something deeper. Their movements were slightly out of sync, as if showing a future or past version of themselves. Mark saw one reflection where Lirian stood close to him, her hand in his, another where she turned away, her eyes full of sorrow. This is strange, he muttered. It is the stones, Liren said quietly. They show us what might be. As they moved further in, the reflections grew more vivid. One showed Mark, injured, Lirian holding him up, her face pale with strain. Another showed them both standing over a fallen Kraden leader, their weapons lowered. Then Mark froze. One panel showed them standing inches apart. His hand reached toward hers, and she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers closed around his. And the moment their hands touched, the reflection flared with light so bright it swallowed everything. Mark stepped back from the panel, his chest tight. What was that? Liren's eyes lingered on the image for a long moment before she turned away. That was the bond. If it forms... The rumble from behind grew louder. Cracks began to form along the corridor walls. Liren's pace quickened. We must go. Now. They reached the end of the Hall of Mirrors, where another doorway of shifting light waited. Liren stopped before stepping through and turned to him. Mark, she said, her voice firm. If we pass through this, there will be no turning back. The stones here, they will decide what happens to us. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. We don't have a choice. The Kraden are coming. She stepped through first, and Mark followed. The light swallowed them both, and the chamber behind vanished. On the other side, they stood in a smaller room, its walls pulsing faintly. The air felt charged, almost alive. Liren's hand twitched at her side, and for a moment, it looked as if she might reach for him. But she stopped, curling her fingers into a fist. The silence between them was deep, broken only by the distant echo of footsteps. Whatever choice the stones would make, Mark knew it was coming soon. The first light of dawn touched the sky beyond the ruins. Mark and Liren stood at the edge of the ancient stones, their bodies tired but spirits unbroken. The bond between them hummed softly, a new strength flowing through their joined hands. Battle with the Kraden had changed everything. Neither of them had expected the bond to form so quickly or so powerfully. Yet now, Mark could feel Liren's thoughts in ways he had never imagined. He heard her hopes, fears, and even her memories, and she sensed his steadiness and courage. Are you ready to move? Lirian asked, her voice calmer now. Mark nodded. Yes. We cannot stay here. The Kraden will regroup. They moved together, their steps lighter than before. The bond made them alert to danger, their senses sharper and their reactions faster. They crossed the rough ground with more ease, the ruins shrinking behind them. As they reached the forest edge, Lirian stopped, suddenly. Her violet eyes scanned the horizon. There is a settlement not far from here, she said. "It is hidden and safe. We can rest and plan." Mark felt a surge of relief. "Lead the way." The forest was quiet in the morning light, birds singing softly in the trees. The air was fresh and cool. Mark thought about how different this world was from his own home, yet he felt a strange connection to it, especially now with Lyraen beside him. Their journey through the woods was peaceful at first, but Mark knew they could not let their guard down. The Kraden were dangerous, and they would come looking again. As they walked, the bond between them grew stronger. Mark could feel when Lyraen was tired or uneasy without her saying a word. She could sense his focus and determination. At one point, Lyraen stumbled on a hidden root. Mark caught her quickly. Their eyes met, and a quiet smile passed between them. "You're getting stronger," she said softly. "So are you," Mark replied. "Together, we can face whatever comes." After several hours, they reached a small clearing. Hidden among thick trees was a village of wooden huts and simple buildings. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of laughter and voices carried on the breeze. Lyraen's face brightened. "This is where my people live in exile. They have welcomed me when others have not." Mark felt honored to meet them. As they entered the village, curious eyes watched from behind windows and doorways. Children peeked from trees, and elders nodded quietly. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes approached. "Lyraen," he said in their shared language. "We heard you were coming." Lyraen smiled. "I bring a friend who will help us." Mark stepped forward and bowed slightly. "I am Mark." The man nodded. "Welcome, Mark. Here you will find safety." For the first time in days, Mark felt a sense of peace. The village was small but full of warmth. The people shared food and stories, and Mark was surprised to find many knew about humans and their colony on Arden. That evening, around a fire, Lyraen told the villagers about the Kraden and the bond. The people listened closely, their faces serious. One elder said, "The bond is rare between our kind and humans. It brings power but also responsibility. You must be careful." Mark looked at Lyraen. "We will face whatever comes together." The night passed quietly, but Mark knew their safety was temporary. The Kraden would not stop hunting them. In the morning, Lyraen and Mark prepared to leave the village. The bond between them had become a steady light, guiding their steps. Before they departed, the elder gave Lyraen a small crystal. "This will help protect you. Use it wisely." Lyraen accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you." As they walked away from the village, Mark looked at Lyraen. "What now?" "We move toward the capital," she said. "There, your leaders will listen, but the journey will be long and dangerous." Mark nodded. "Then we travel together." The forest grew thicker and darker as they moved deeper. Shadows danced between the trees, and every sound made them alert. The bond helped them communicate silently, warning of threats or sharing plans, without words. One afternoon, they encountered a group of strange creatures blocking their path. Large, with glowing eyes and sharp claws, they snarled and growled. Mark and Lyraen stood back to back, ready. The bond heightened their senses, allowing them to fight with perfect timing. After a fierce struggle, the creatures retreated, wounded but alive. Mark and Lyraen breathed heavily but smiled. They had survived together. As the sun set, they camped beside a small river. Sitting close, Mark reached out and held Lyraen's hand. "We have come far," he said. She nodded. "And the bond grows, stronger every day." Mark looked into her violet eyes. "I never thought I could feel this way." "Neither did I," Lyraen whispered. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, and for the first time, Mark felt hope. No matter what dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. Daniel stood on the landing deck of the great Vera carrier. The massive hall stretched far above him, its silver walls shining in the light of the twin suns outside. The air was still and warm, carrying that faint metallic scent he remembered. From his first day, Ari approached slowly. She was wearing the formal robe of the Vera Council, flowing blue fabric with silver edges that matched the patterns on her skin. Her steps were silent, but Daniel could feel her presence growing stronger with every move she made toward him. The last time they had stood here together, everything had been uncertain. Ari's hand had trembled when she reached for his. She had been unsure if trust was possible between their people, and Daniel had been unsure if his choice to reach out was even welcome. But now, things had changed. Ari stopped in front of him. Her silver eyes studied him for a moment before she spoke. "The Council has signed the alliance," she said. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of something far greater than politics. "Today, the humans and the Vera are bound together. We will fight side by side if war comes, and we will share our worlds in peace when it does not." Daniel let out a slow breath. He thought of the speeches in the Hall of Speakers earlier that day. He thought of how Ari had stood beside him while others tried to challenge him. She had not only defended him, she had held his hand in front of everyone, an act so bold for her people that even her opponents could not speak against it. The alliance was more than a treaty. It was a promise. Ori took one more step closer. "When you asked to touch my hand," she said softly, "you did not know what it meant in my world. You thought it was only a gesture of friendship. But for the Vera, it means something greater. It means we trust you with our truth, with our life. I did not think I would ever give that trust to anyone outside my own kind." Daniel remembered her trembling fingers on that first day. He remembered how he had felt warmth spreading from her skin to his, almost like a living current. Now he understood. It had been more than a strange sensation. It had been a sign that the distance between them was already breaking. "And yet you gave it," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, her silver markings shifting faintly. "And now, I give it again." She raised her hand, palm open toward him. This time it did not shake. Daniel looked at her for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment. Then he placed his own hand in hers. The warmth came again, but now it felt steady. Her grip was firm, her skin cool at first, but warming quickly. Her silver markings glowed just slightly, a soft light that spread across her arm. The crew members nearby saw it and began to murmur quietly to one another. Daniel and Ari stood there for a long time without speaking. The hall was silent except for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Outside the massive windows, the twin suns were lowering, their golden light painting the clouds below. Finally, Ari spoke again. "The others will remember this day," she said. "Not because of the papers they signed or the words they spoke, but because two people from different worlds decided to stand close instead of apart." Daniel smiled. "Maybe that's all it takes sometimes. One step forward, one hand offered." Ori's eyes met his, and for the first time since he had met her, there was no trace of doubt in them. "Then let us keep stepping forward. Together." They walked side by side toward the main exit of the deck. The great doors opened, revealing the view of the world below, a pale blue planet with wide silver oceans and vast green continents. It was the first world Daniel would visit as part of the new alliance, and Auri would be his guide. The path ahead would not be without danger. There were still factions in both human and Vera society who distrusted the other side. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and perhaps even conflict. But Daniel knew something now. Trust was not built in an instant, but it could begin in one. And for the Vera, once trust was given, it was not easily broken. As they left the landing deck, Auri still kept her hand in his. For a Vera, such contact in public was rare, yet she did not let go. People they passed looked at them, some with surprise, others with quiet approval. The air between them carried a feeling that no words could replace. They reached the transport that would take them to the planet's surface. Daniel glanced out the side window as they descended through the clouds. The sunlight caught the ocean below, making it shine like a sheet of glass. He could see cities along the coast, tall and slender towers of white stone and silver, connected by thin bridges that seemed to float above the water. Ori watched him as he looked. "You are seeing my world for the first time," she said. "I hope it will welcome you as I have." Daniel looked back at her. "I think it already has." When they landed, the air was fresh and cool. The sounds of waves reached them from the shore nearby. A group of Vera citizens waited to greet them. Their eyes went to the joined hands immediately, and many of them exchanged glances, whispering quietly among themselves. Ari stepped forward and addressed them. "This is Daniel of Earth," she said clearly. "He comes not as a visitor, but as a friend." The words seemed to settle over the crowd like a calm wind. One by one, the Vera lowered their heads in acknowledgement. Daniel realized that this was the first step, not just for him, but for all of humanity. Later that evening, after the formal greetings were over, Ari led him to a quiet balcony overlooking the sea. The sky was deep orange now, with the moons rising above the horizon. She leaned on the railing, looking out at the waves. "When I first met you," she said, "I thought you were reckless. You asked for something you did not understand. But perhaps that is what made you different. You reached for trust before knowing if it could be yours." Daniel stood beside her. "Maybe that's what both our worlds needed. Someone to take the first step." They stood together as the sky darkened and the stars came out. Above them, far beyond sight, the great carrier ship orbited in silence, a symbol of two worlds now connected, and on the balcony, with the sea, wind in their faces, and the stars shining over both their skies, Daniel and Ori kept their hands joined, knowing the bond they had formed would carry farther than either of them could yet imagine.